Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Editor's Note. I'm Jonathan Hassan, and in today's edition, we're going to focus on the Islamic Republic of Iran, on the situation in the Middle East. What are we to expect in the next 24 hours, 72 hours, 1 week, and so on? We're trying to dissect the various complexities this week ahead of what may be a full frontal confrontation between the United States of America and the Ayatollah regime in Tehran. Is regime change going to impact this region and the world at large? To discuss that and much more, I am delighted to host today my dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Dr. Rafael Bardaji, formerly Spain's National Security Advisor, currently the CEO for Worldwide Strategy. It's always a pleasant opportunity to have you here.
My pleasure to be in Jerusalem studio, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Well, Rafael, I always pick your brain on things. And obviously, we are going to touch on the Iran topic, which is something that is troubling, to say it mildly. But before that, we saw the American reporter, or he calls himself a journalist, even though I think he's just a PR agent for totalitarian regimes, traveled to Israel for an interview with the U.S. ambassador to Jerusalem, Mr. Mike Huckabee, during the course of which they had their interview. It's going to air at some point, but I was thinking about this individual who's fomented a lot of anti-Semitic remarks, anti-Christian remarks. He's really working against the Christian evangelical community in particular, but also Catholics and Protestants and the conservative churches. He's sending his own revisionist interpretation of Christianity, which, as a Christian, obviously boils my own blood at times. But with that being said, really observing what he has been doing, this Tucker Carlson, over the course of the last year, or even longer than that, he is really working to bring about a rift in the conservative movement, in the Republican Party. And to me, it seems like he is proactively working to undermine President Trump in the midterm election. Is that a fair assessment of what can be observed today?
Well, I have to say, Jonathan, that there are some egos so big that they need an audience independently of what the audience is. And I think he is looking for, a kind of niche market, which is quite radical. But having said that, I also believe that there are other forces that try to use some people like him to advance their own agendas. Foreign powers in the United States, we can name countries in the Gulf that have an interest in getting Democrats majorities in the Congress, in the House of Representatives at least, and that is a very explosive cocktail. I think, nonetheless, that yes, there is a problem in the extreme fringes of the MAGA movement, that they don't understand probably many of the actions and decisions taken by the president himself, because President Donald Trump is not an isolationist. On the contrary, he's trying to rule the whole world according to American interest, which is not basically the basic naive idea of some of the what they consider to be the intellectuals behind the MAGA movement. But yes, I think Carlson didn't need to come to Israel to interview the American ambassador here.
He was unwilling to leave the airport.
Yeah, he produced some kind of narratives which are clearly lies, saying that he was detained when he wasn't, that the passport was taken away for the producer, for the secondary inspection. Well, that's happening every day for many people in America and in Ben Gurion and in other places. But that doesn't mean that they were targeting him or his team. So he's just trying to put himself in the center to mount a scandal and to undermine, as you said, President Trump's policies and relations with Israel, which is really disgusting.
It is. And it really is shocking to know that this individual has fallen so far away from the tree. I mean, his father was an ardent supporter of the U.S.-Israel alliance and has worked years in Washington to not only bolster this alliance, but he truly understood intellectually. He understood the importance of what Israel is to the United States, to Europe, to Western civilization at large. And it seems like his son has either daddy issues or he is just bought by certain totalitarian regimes that, you spoke about the Gulf. It's not a lie that Tucker Carlson has a very strong relationship with Qatar, which is known to work tirelessly and to utilize all the tools at its disposal to establish a rift between Israel and the United States. Now, let's focus for a moment on the elephant in the room, so to speak, the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Iranian regime, Islamic Republic, Ayatollah regime, has three portfolios that are, causing a lot of problems for the West at large, Israel in particular as well, but also to the United States. And that is its constant aspirations to attain nuclear weapon capabilities, its ongoing efforts to increase its arsenal of ballistic missiles and to expand the range of its various munitions and technology. And it's fomenting terror, not just by terror proxies throughout the region, namely Hezbollah, Hashd al-Shabi, Liwa Zainibiyun, Liwa Fatimiyun, the Houthis, and so on and so forth, but it's also operating on European soil. It has been responsible for attempting bombing attacks, assassinations. I mean, your colleague, the founder of Vox, who was gunned down just away a couple of meters from his office. And the Islamic Republic has not shied away from trying to eliminate American officials and dissidents in the United States, all of which warrants a very strong reaction. Now, looking at this, the United States obviously wanted to discuss those matters with the Iranians for quite some time. And the Iranians have said no. Months after month after month, they said, no, we're not willing to discuss any of that. Then the United States brought a relatively large force into the region, and then they said, okay, let's talk. And then they changed the terms of the discussions, of course, while in process. Now, the United States has the diplomatic course and the military course. Obviously, both courses are extensions of politics. Makes sense to us. Where are we at this point? And will we potentially see this materialize into a wide-scale conflagration?
Well, let me quote Donald Rumsfeld first before getting into the subject itself. Donald Rumsfeld said once, there are things we know, there are things we know we don't know, and there are things we don't know we don't know. And I believe the situation today is surrounded by a lot of unknowns. No? But what we know for certain is a few things. No? One is that the Ayatollah's regime genetics is revolutionary and Islamist. With a sense of Persian history as well as a hegemon in the region. So the requirements for an agreement based on the American position, which is the nuclear portfolio, it is the ballistic missiles threat, it is the proxy use in the region, and it's also the end of the enmity between Iran and the United States, the big Satan, according to the regime in Tehran, has to be addressed. No? And I think altogether impossible to digest. Even if Khomeini took the bitter chalice when he has to agree ceasefire with Iraq. I think it's too much for the current regime to accept all the requirements set up by the American administration. So unless they dramatically commit suicide, I don't think the deal, as comprehensive as it's today in the planning, is possible. So the two options there is, okay, we forget about the deal and we leave in place the regime, or we act militarily and push for a regime change somehow. No? In the context of the major opposition demonstrations and the civilian demonstrations against the regime, no? That even after the repressive crackdown, they are still demonstrating. There are curfew during the Ramadan where the people tend to go out at night. So I think the regime is very in the corner, no? And that's a window of opportunity for a little push and put an end to this revolutionary Islamist pro-nuclear, pro-destabilizing regime. No? Having said that, okay, I think the Americans are pursuing the diplomatic course first, and if that goes nowhere, they have all the assets in place to do something. We know that President Trump always preferred to have a kind of negotiation outcome, but we also know that he's not aware, he's not unconscious that he has to press the red button. He will do it. He did it in the past. He did it in Venezuela as well. So we may expect that if he feels frustrated or cheated by the Iranians, he may resort to action. We also know that President Trump has a span of time limited for patience. He has set up a deadline, a clear-cut timeline, and I think he should commit himself to that. No? We also know that the Ayatollah's regime are living in a bubble. They misread the Americans and the Israelis in the past, and they may be making the wrong calculations now as well. No? So it is likely that we are going to see an impending military strike against the Ayatollahs. It could. It could take longer. I don't know the timing, and I don't think nobody knows. And those who knows, if they know, they are lip tight. And but it's something that is getting more weight, and we cannot discard. On the contrary, I think we should be prepared to deal with that contingency. What could be the effect if the Ayatollah's regime is destroyed, politically and militarily? Well, I don't expect. You don't need first a replacement. In most of the cases, when you see a kind of regime collapse, the Soviet Union, you could go back in history. There are always turmoil and some kind of time where chaotic situation emerge. And we need to be prepared also for that. No? That will create some short-term instability in the Gulf, but medium term and long term, a lot of prospect and promises. No, for sure.
Highly likely there's going to be some type of internal unrest, and many of the neighboring countries are trying to, fill the vacuum, so to speak, and try and shape the country in their own image, in their own national security interests, and those of potentially expansionist nature. The United States would have to play a significant role here, not necessarily with boots on the ground, but in putting a stop, and it has a lot of leverage against all those neighbors, to include Afghanistan, to include Pakistan, to include Saudi, Turkey, and others that would very much like to see them themselves gain the upper hand from such a scenario. They have concerns, those countries, and those are genuine national security concerns that need to be taken into account. Not for no reason they are objecting right now. Give us a couple of examples, if you will, particularly, for instance, with the Saudis or with the Turks, with regard to their calculus.
Yeah, I think, first of all, some of the Gulf monarchies will try to exert some influence in the Arab regions within the Iran, for sure. And given the rivalries between the Saudis and the Emiratis, we may see some kind of friction. But I think the Americans have some leverage, as you said, to prevent those friction to escalate. No? But yeah, there are also traditional fears. No, let's imagine for a second that the new regime, wherever it takes place, is much more pro-Western and pro-American than the one we had.
Which everybody expects.
Yeah, that for sure. No?
Yes.
That's an assumption taken for granted. But let's say that this is true. So Iran could become the best ally of the Western world and America in the region, undermining the role that has been played in the last decades by Saudi Arabia, for instance. So it's not only a kind of jealousy, it's some interest promotion here, which will be at stake. So I think that's why some thinkers and some decision makers in Riyadh are saying, okay, look, yes, we don't want the Ayatollah's threat, the Iranian threat against us, but we need to prepare for an alternative regime that may undermine our leverage with Americans. No? So yes, for the first time, this famous phrase of the new Middle East that we have been listening for decades, it may be true. I think there will be dynamics in presence that we haven't seen ever before if the Ayatollah regime is removed from the picture.
More than 80% of Iran's oil production is currently shipped in the direction of China, which from China's perspective is roughly 14% of its intake, gas intake, oil product intake. Obviously, if that now is redirected, it would essentially flood the market to a certain degree, lower the oil prices significantly. Iran is not part of the OPEC Plus. So obviously it has its own regulations. And if a new regime comes in, it could play a significant role in advantage to both the United States and European countries that are currently heavily reliant on Qatari LNG and the Saudis and the Emiratis. This obviously is not something they would like to see at present, particularly since this would pretty much bring about a new world order.
Yeah, I think one of the strategic global calculus in Washington may be, okay, how removing Tehran's government today will affect the global scale relationship with China and how much pressure that will mean. On the Chinese side, I think they learned a lesson from the Russians in Syria. When you are too tied to a regime that is falling, you will out of the picture if the regime change finally.
Right.
And if they are really thinking that the days of the Ayatollahs are numbered, they may try to play in a way that they can be positioned again with the new regime.
So they're
somehow.
hedging themselves?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're very prudent. I mean, when the Iranians asked them for help in reconstituting the nuclear program in the last month, and also technologies for the missiles, solid rocket fuel, they haven't delivered yet. They are waiting to see. And but yes, I think the key question here is whether you believe that the regime is doomed. I don't know how long it will take for them to fall, or that the regime could be preserved through repression and some kind of domestic policies and international arrangements. But if the regime is doomed and is out of the picture at some point, that will have an effect on Russia and will have an effect in China.
Well, it blindsided both the Russians and the Chinese and Iran and others with regard to Venezuela, where they have no contracts right now of oil imports or exports rather, which the Russians are very upset about.
Yeah, or look at the third consequences, stopping the flow of oil from Venezuela is putting the Cuban regime on the brink. So sometimes you don't expect, kind of consequences that are very real, and some strategic planners have in mind. So yes, I think what we have seen in the Caribbean could be replicated in the world if Iran is expecting or the regime change that has been needed for so many years now.
Let's bring Israel to the picture. Israel obviously would like to see this regime fall. I mean, this tyrannical regime that calls death to America, death to Israel, death to Britain. I haven't heard the Brits outraged about, a regime calling for its demise over and over again. But looking at today's political construct in the UK, unfortunately, I'm deeply concerned about what's happening there. But Israel is not at the lead here. It's not leading this campaign against the Iranians. It's actually in the back seat, saying, America, we're willing to support you with whatever you need, whatever you ask, but this is your show. You're the dominant power. We're the junior partner, so to speak. Give us a little bit of a layout here.
Well, I think Israel acted when it needed to act last year, June. But thanks to that intervention, the existential threat of the nuclear program was removed from the picture for some years, at least. The ballistic missile threat was significantly diminished. The Iranians still need some time to reconstitute their forces, though they can threaten Israel with a barrage of hundreds of missiles yet. But I think this is a show essentially between America and Israel. The president of the United States said very clearly, help is underway for the demonstrations. He was the target of an assassination attempt, so he can take it even personally.
And everybody knows Iran was behind it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
He said years ago that Iran always tried to cheat as a behavior. So I think he understands the delay in tactics of the Iranian negotiators. So everything is there. No? I think that the responsibility of the United States president is to promote American interest first. No? And I see colluding the interest of America in getting out of the picture and removing the regime in Tehran. Now they can, and now I think there are the conditions to do it. No? There is no better window of opportunity, according to me.
The Iranian people deserve freedom, which is obviously something that they have sacrificed immensely for. Not just the last, month where we saw the atrocities committed against them, but it's 47 years of atrocities where, the previous president, Ibrahim Raisi, oversaw 30,000 hangings just himself, which it really amazes me to see how certain actors are willing to turn a blind eye to all those things in order to engage with them. With that being said, I am also very curious to see all those documents that will be unveiled after the fall of the regime, with all the money, to see which NGOs in the U.S. are going to fall in Europe. Yeah. I think a couple of governments may fall in Europe, which were funded by this Ayatollah regime, which may surprise some people in Europe, but they'll find out soon enough, I assume. We don't have very much time left, and obviously Europe is very dear to both our hearts, and we want to see it prevail. But with all the optimism that I want to have, sometimes I ask myself whether or not it's wishful thinking. Mm-hmm. I'm praying for European nations to reassert their control on their own countries, but we see that there is so much foreign influence and interest being plagued throughout the continent.
Yeah, it's true, but that's the new playfield. No? We have to adapt. I think if we have to mention one characteristic today, is fluidity everywhere, no? Even in our own thinking. But I think the conditions are now for a clear view that the fog is dissipating, and one of the turning point will be whether or not the Ayatollahs stay in power in Tehran. If they are removed, I think we'll have the ability and the conditions to reestablish ourselves with a clarity that we didn't have in the past. No? That will be an asset for the Western loving people.
Well, with that being said, of course, the next target would highly likely be the Muslim Brotherhood, which is no less of an evil in Western civilization.
Yeah. Well, you only had to listen to Secretary Marco Rubio in the Berkunde Munich. He's really proposing a kind of civilizational revival, essentially. something that the Europeans totally missed from his speech. But because we need it. If not, as the national security strategy of the United States said, in less than 20 years, Europe will have transformed itself into something else, losing all the Western values that have been characterizing and inspiring our lives. So yes, we are in this point. Whether we take advantage of some scenarios and actions to reinforce this direction is something that we will see in the coming weeks or months.
Same goes for Canada. Same goes for Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah.
I understand New Zealand is a little bit better than what's happening in Australia, but nonetheless, we're looking around the world and South Africa, and other countries that really need that revival, a true Christian revival.
Yeah.
Without that, it's the downfall of Western civilization. Dr. Rafael Bardaji, thank you so very much for all of your insights.
My pleasure.
As ever. Here. And before we continue, to say thank you also to our viewers, is there a closing sentence? We have less than a minute.
I just would like to remind our audience that on Monday will be the anniversary of George Washington. And that's a particular special moment when we are trying to revitalize the Western world and values from the founding father examples. And I think the Americans are destined to play a big role, a major role in this revitalization of our Western civilization for the better.
Absolutely. I couldn't put it better. Thank you again. And I'd like to thank you at home and to point out that TV7 Israel is exclusively reliant on the donation and support of our viewers. So if you're blessed by our productions and find value in what we do on a regular basis, please don't hesitate to support our organization, the ministry. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. From me here in Jerusalem, Shabbat Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.